If you had one word to describe the Tevis ride and your experiences, what would that be?
Concentration.
Concentration. That's good.
I have a second word.
And what would that be?
Entertainment.
Well, we're here at the Flamingo Hotel in Santa Rosa, California, with the Western States Trail Foundation production known as the Tales from the Tevis Trail. And we're joined today off camera in the audience by Chuck Stolley, the ride director of the Tevis Cup 100-mile one-day ride, John's daughter Carolyn, Pam Stolley, Chuck's wife, my wife Ann, and the chair of the Western States Trail Foundation Historical Committee, Terry Reed. And of course, we're being filmed by Bobcat Media Productions, Bob Kelly. So welcome. I want to introduce John at this point and talk and have a conversation about his years of experiences with competing in the Tevis Cup 100-mile one-day ride, as well as its organization. John began in 1967 and spanned some 27 years to the point where he earned his 20th buckle in 1994. Is that right?
True.
Yes. In that span of time, he didn't finish on only just 2 occasions. So he was 20 for 22, a remarkable 91% completion rate. And in that period of time,
I want to know, do you know if that's a record?
I don't know if that's a record. It could very well be. I know the percentage of completion at 91% far exceeds what the Tevis Cup experiences over the span of these 64 years of running on an annual basis. That's just a tick above 50%. So you're well ahead of the game.
Well, I was aware of the average statistic.
In that span of time, though, and I've forgotten just what years they were, but there was a time where you ran off 13 consecutive finishes. And a real true, that's 13 starts, 13 finishes in a row. That's really quite remarkable. John also served on the Board of Governors in this period, much of this period of time, I think from 1969 or 68, thereabouts.
68 or 69.
All the way up to the time he earned his 20th buckle in 1994. And on a professional level, John was an executive officer of optical coating laboratories here in Santa Rosa, until which time the company sold. I think that was 1999. So I have some questions I want to start with, and that would be some obvious questions to begin with, and that being, how did you hear about the event, and how did it all just kind of come about?
Well, I had a friend who had sold us some horses that were intended for the kids mostly, although I did enjoy riding. I had never ridden much at all before we got the idea of getting these horses. But the guy that sold them, after he saw how enthusiastic I was about riding that one of those little mares called Sally Horse, he said, you know, there's an article in the Western States, Western Horseman, about this ride up in the Sierras. Said, you ought to take a shot at that. So I said, you really think so, huh? And so anyway, I read the article and I thought, well, that looks like fun. Well, but at that time the horse was only about 4 years old and too young to go. So I sort of planned to go the next year, which was '67. And so as the time wore on, I went up and talked to Drew Barner, and she kind of encouraged me to do this. And so then one thing led to another, and pretty soon I was signed up to do this.
How was it a big challenge such as this to prepare, not knowing really all there is to do in preparing for a...
Well, I guess it's just abject stupidity.
That's good.
It looked like fun from the article. I loved being in the mountains, and one of the things I thought I could do with horses is see more mountains than I could on foot. I used to hike some, and so I just talked to her a little bit. I called Drew back and I said, "Do you think I can do this?" And she encouraged me to give it a whirl. So as I said, stupidity.
But you came to Auburn and you probably pre-rode a little bit of the...
Well, I came up there and I camped at the fairgrounds. Maybe she had told me to camp at the fairgrounds. I can't recall. But then I said, well, where does this trail start? And she described the trail that starts by your house.
Roby Point?
Roby Point, and follow that trail down. You go across this No-Hands Bridge. Once you get there, you see the trail going up the hill. Well, I tried that, and I got about, on a Sunday, probably a Saturday or Sunday weekend, hotter than the hinges of hell, and it was poor little horse get part way up the hill, and she would want to stop and catch her breath, and then it looked like we were going to hit the crest of the hill, and then we'd go a little bit, and the hill would keep going on, kind of hopeless. So I went back and told Drew that I was really having trouble with this. Did she know somebody that knew the trail better than me, so I could have a better experience, maybe somebody I could ride with? And she said, well, let me talk to Wendell. And so I went and got Wendell, and Wendell said, oh, you need to get Bob Richardson to help you. So I don't know how it happened, but Bob came over to the fairgrounds one evening, and there was two horses there. The little horse I was trying to ride, and daughter Carolyn's horse, Three Socks. And he thought Three Socks was the one to go. Well, Three Socks was only a 3-year-old at the time, I think, and maybe 4, but at any rate, that Three Socks looked much more like an endurance horse than the Sally horse did. So we went for he said, come on, I'll be back tomorrow night, and or tomorrow afternoon late, and we'll take a ride. And he brought Bob by Jingo back. That was his stallion, Appaloosa stallion, big stout horse. And he said, now follow me. That was he's from southern Missouri, and slaughtered the King's English pretty good. And follow me. He said, well, I tried to follow him, and he went down those switchbacks from your house down to the river trail, like I go down a slalom course on skis. And this horse I was on had never done anything like that. So that was the first bit of that excitement. And then we got across the bridge and started up that hill. About halfway up that hill, my horse was flagging. He says, well, we can't have that. We've got to fix this. So he said, just stay up there. And he hooked his dolly on and tied it around the halter on my horse, and he just drug her up that hill and down the next hill and across through some brush up towards Cool. And poor horse that I was on was just dragging, and he was dragging her. So we went back. He said, that horse is going to take some work. At this point, the ride was only about 5 weeks away. And I said, well, I guess it will. Yeah. So he said, well, I'll take that horse and shape her up for the ride. I said, would you crew for me then? And I'd never been on an organized ride before, so I didn't know what I was getting into. So, but I had heard about crews.
Very important.
And so he said, yeah, and he quoted me a price for doing all this. And so, fine, Bob, I'll leave the horse with you. So a few days later, I got a call from him. He says, Dr. Cook, Hank Cook, a longtime vet for the ride, he's been up here to see your horse. Said that it's got aciduria, and which is a tying up sort of a thing. He says he's having me give her EC shots all the time and have her on green grass. So can't work her for a while, a few days, and but he thinks she'll be all right. And a couple of weeks he called and said, well, she's back on the trail with her. She's doing good, and come on up and ride. So I came up, and we trailered up in his old rig to Robinson Flat, I think, somewhere close. That time it was unpaved all the way to Robinson Flat, and it was dusty as all get out. And we rode down in the canyon someplace and back out, and pretty soon I jumped off the horse and started on foot. And he says, why are you doing that? And I said, well, this is for me. It looks to me like I'm going to have to spend a fair amount of time on foot. And so this is my conditioning. At any rate, when ride time came, Bob and a couple of his buddies were crewing for us. And Martha, my wife Martha, came up with the kids, and we started from Tahoe City.
Tahoe City.
Right in front of the old Tahoe Inn. And I don't know how we got there, but I remember unloading the horse somewhere nearby and riding up to the front of the hotel, getting in line for a controlled ride to wherever we were going, which ended up being through Alpine Meadows, which I'd skied a lot, but here it was as dusty could be. It was just horrible experience going through this controlled ride, and I was probably at the tail end of it, so I got a lot of the worst of the dust. And when people got done with that, they looked like coal miners after a hard day in the underground. So just eating dust. So then we started at Squaw Valley.
Is this where you broke out into groups or flights, as they call them?
At that time, Barney Dobus was the starter, and he kept order, and you had drawn groups of 6, flights of 6 every 2 minutes. He would start another group, and so he was pretty much an in-charge guy, and big enough to enforce it too.
It's true.
That's where we started. I think I started in a fairly late group, probably one of the latest groups.
So what did your family think of all this to begin with?
Well, I guess stupid and crazy sounds, but they went along with it.
Okay.
Went along with it. The kids went along with it. I guess they thought it was just an experience, but Martha she was in charge of driving the rig, driving the car. In those days, people didn't have rigs like we do now, like we did most of the time in the later years that I rode. People would pull the rig with a puller, an old 2-horse trailer, an old Miley trailer. I bought my first one new for $1,200, and pulled it. So she was pulling it behind a 1965 Chrysler New Yorker. And she still tells the tale of trying to get up to Robinson Flat from Soda Springs on that old road behind the traffic, and how dusty that was. So I don't know. I kind of lost track of where
No, you're good.
with your questions, but-
Well, in that particular year, I had to pull on my glasses to read. You finished 46th in 19 hours and 48 minutes on Sally. But in 1968, you came back, rode Old Blue in 14 hours, 39 minutes for a 6th place finish. Old Blue was a 7-year-old Arab thoroughbred gelding. That's a 5-hour difference.
Well,
What happened?
It's all in the horse. It's all in the horse, Hal. You know that.
Yeah.
So, but I was determined. First of all, I had never intended to do the Tevis Ride at one time. I thought I just wanted to have that experience. But after I did that, the first time, and with all the hardships I endured there, and I probably spent a full marathon on foot. If you add all the time I was on foot, and some experience of losing the horse and having it run off, and because I didn't know how to tail, and I wasn't equipped to tail, so the horse get away from me.
And that was the Sally horse that got
Sally
away?
horse, yeah. But but I did figure that, and for a long part of the ride, I was by myself. That first ride.
Yes.
And that part wasn't as much fun as being with people. But most of the time when I was with people, we were on narrow trails and you couldn't pass. You couldn't visit very much. But I remember going up towards Last Chance. Mm-hmm. The dusty road goes into Last Chance. Well, that's a boring thing, and we were all by ourselves, and everybody else had gone on. And the horse didn't want to go when it was hot. And I started singing Jingle Bells. I sang Jingle Bells all the way to Last Chance. We got taken care of there by that family that has the watermelon.
Oh, yeah.
And all the, take care of the horses. So.
Otto Brink.
Yeah. But they'd almost packed up ready to leave when I got there.
They were just waiting.
But anyway, I resolved that I was going to do it one more time and do better. That's what happened. So then the story about getting Old Blue was a whole another tale.
It was.
Yeah.
Do you want to go into that?
Well, I can tell you a little about it.
Sure.
It could be a long one, but I started looking for a better horse, and I wasn't used to paying much money. So I put an ad in the local paper here in Santa Rosa, and about 3 lines described I wanted a horse that was capable of being trained up to do endurance. And Martha took the calls because I was at the office and or doing something else, and when I got back one day, she said, "Well, you had 3 calls on your ad. 2 of them are no good, but one of them, she says, I think's a winner." She says, the guy says, "I've got your horse." And I called him back. It was Bill Stornetta up at Point Arena, the big old rancher, big old sheep ranch up there, and on the coast. And so I picked up my friend that had sold us the 3 horses that we had. That was Sally and her sister and Carolyn's horse, and 3 socks. And I called Snyder and I said, "Take me right up there with me on Saturday and we'll look at this horse." So we pulled the trailer up there. I was pretty convinced it probably was the right horse. Pulled the trailer up there, and Bill came out and he said, "That's the horse over there in the corral." And Snyder said, I thought that was a mirror. I thought you were selling a gelding. So that looks like a mirror. It was fat. And this was February 1st or about this time of year. And so Bill called a ranch hand. He said, a Basque fellow. He said, whatever the fellow's name, he said, would you go get old Blue, bring him over here? And so the guys, I remember the guy saying, you mean old Blue? So yeah, get Blue. So he got Blue, and we looked him over, didn't even ride him, we just trotted him out a little bit. Loaded him up, $350. And brought him home, and I started riding him. And fortunately, we had a lot of land to ride on, probably 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 acres. So we had lots of trails. And he'd been used as they'd packed for hunting. They packed pig on him when they shoot pigs and so forth. So he had some work in the hills. He just hadn't been worked much that season or that winter.
Well, with a riding time of 14 hours and 30-some minutes or whatever it was, he must have been able to cover some ground.
He had a long stride, a nice, easy trot, and it was ground covering trot. And he did it with ease. The only trouble was he was raised up there on the coast where it's cool. He wasn't used to hot weather, so it took a fair amount of doing to get him acclimated to hot weather.
So by 1970, you're joined on the ride with your daughter Carolyn, who's with us today. She went with you on 2 occasions, I think 70 and 71. Your son Scott in 72, and then Stacy shortly thereafter. And I think it was Stacy that went 10 of 12 attempts, 10 finishes out of 12 attempts. What did it mean to you to have your children participating with you?
Well, from a selfish standpoint, it meant I had a good riding partner and help training horses.
It helps.
But I think the real truth is it was just a lot of fun having a family that I could get involved with the kids. We spent a lot of time together and had a lot of pretty good times and some experiences.
Carolyn finishes with you in 1970, but in 71, something must have happened. She wound up finishing, I've forgotten now, 5th place or 6th, and you were a bit back in the pack. What transpired there?
That was in 70. I had a crazy horse named Alley Sham, I think. Do you have a note on what that horse was?
Oh, yeah, no. You finished 44th riding a new horse, Rush Creek Steve.
Well, that was 71, wasn't it?
71.
Yeah.
Yes, in 70.
In 70, I had that Alley Sham.
Yeah. That's right.
Well, Alley Sham had been a Pacific Coast trotting champion, pulling sulkies when he was 4 years old. But besides that, his only claim to fame was he's crazy as a coot. And I remember Kerry Ridgway and I were riding one time out at the ranch, and I was on Sally horse, or Kerry was on Sally horse, and this is before Kerry had his own horse, and I was on Alley Sham, and we were going along a narrow trail, and Kerry said, "How about if I ride that Alley Sham?" And I said, "Are you sure you want to do that?" "Yeah, I'd like to try that." So we go along this trail, and there was some logs over the trail, and Sally horse just kind of over them easy. And this Alley Sham with Kerry on him, he jumped the first log, and that got him excited. And he jumped the next log, and then he went over the side. Kerry bailed off. He was down there. I had visions of coming back with Lime to take care of it. But we climbed down in there and got him back out of this canyon. And And I don't know how I got on that subject, but except that's why I didn't ride that horse the next year.
I see.
And although he behaved himself pretty well on that first ride, I just decided I wanted to get a horse that came from a group of horses or a ranch where they had a reputation. And that's where I got that Steve horse from Rush Creek Land and Cattle Company, Ellis Ruby.
In Nebraska.
Yeah, Nebraska. So I called Ellis and asked him if he had a horse suitable for me, and he said, well, he had this horse, Steve, and we talked about it. So I said, okay, I'm sending you a deposit on that horse. We'll be back to pick him up. So Martha and I drove back there, and when we got there, Ellis said, Jimmy, that was his little 13-year-old boy who was in love with this horse. He said, go get Steve. Jimmy came back. He was tears in his eyes, crying, and he said, Steve's lame. So he'd been snake bit.
Been bitten, yeah, rattlesnake.
On the foot. So, so then we negotiated a new price, and that brought Steve home. So, but Steve had been a circle horse. He was a daisy clipper. He had a beautiful canter, long hand gallop. He could run for miles that way, but he couldn't drop for sour apples. And I guess you had him later.
I had him later. He did interfere,
Yeah.
and but he did have a lovely canter.
Yeah. Anyway, he was pretty good, and in that way. But on a long ride, there was no use trying to. And the ride was only 6 weeks away when I hauled him home. So he had to recover from the snake bite and then get a little bit of work in, and then go to Tevis. So that was his first ride.
I see.
So I was going at a measured pace with the idea of finishing the ride. 3 Socks knew the trail, and he was a fierce competitor. He was hard for anybody to hold back when we started a ride. But he wasn't crazy. He wouldn't throw you off or anything like that. But he was a fierce competitor. Carolyn couldn't hold him back.
And that's why he
Yeah,
finished
so
what he did.
So I started out sponsoring, and when she left me, then Carrie picked her up. When she left Carrie, then Walt Tibbetts picked her up, and Walt was riding in for an early finish.
Yeah, top 10.
So top 10. So Carolyn just went along, and she never held him up. I don't think she was ever on foot.
Gee, that's a pretty
the
good
whole way.
finish.
Yeah, he was a good horse. Well, I rode him a couple of 2 or 3 times after that.
Yeah, I know you did. Speaking of your horses, I wanted to read some statistics here.
Oh, okay.
You had 14 horses that started to the Tevis ride that were ridden either by you, your family, or friends from 1967 to 1994 that combined for 38 finishes out of 43 starts. That's an 88% completion rate. 4 of your horses finished the Tevis ride 5 or more times. That would be 3 Socks, HCC Prince Chicos, HCC Prince Mono, and Tino. And as a result, they've been placed on the newly formed or newly established Wendell Roby Cup trophy, which is recognizing horses from the Tevis rides in the past that have finished 5 or more times. Now, Chicos was a gelding, came from the Hyannis Cattle Company of Nebraska, finished the Tevis ride 7 consecutive times out of those same numbers. He never got pulled. And the same is true of Mono, except he was 6 for 6. That's really a tremendous amount of finishing percentage. I wanted to get your thoughts about these particular horses and what made them so dominant in a time that you rode them.
Some people, including you, I think you probably influenced me a lot to talk to Ted Jerry.
Yeah, of the Hyannis
Ted
Cattle
Jerry
Company.
had the Hyannis Land and Cattle Company, 8,000 acres back there.
Yep.
And in the Sandhills. And they raised some darn good horses. So that's, by that time I had decided I wanted to try to find some decent horses, some decent Arabs from out of the country, or out of the Santa Rosa area.
Yeah.
And I'd been scouring all around looking for horses. So those horses were not even broke when I talked to Ted about them. I said, I'm not buying horses that aren't broke so I can get an idea what they're like. So he said, well, give me 3 weeks and I'll have, what was that lady that lived with him?
Sheila.
Sheila. He said, I'll have Sheila
Break them.
fix them up for you.
That's good.
And so we went back there, and it was hailing that day on that tin barns, those tin barns, and he had a little track inside one of those big tin barns. And Sheila was trying to show me those horses in there.
Bad combination.
That was kind of a hoot, but I don't think I rode him. And I said, well, I can't remember for sure, but I think what happened there was we just drove back to see him, and without the idea that we're going to haul him back on that trip. So I said, you got to work those over some more, and then ship them out. So I'm not sure, but Carrie's son Blake may have hauled those
Carrie
back.
Ridgway's son.
Carrie
Okay.
Ridgway's son Blake may have hauled them back out for us. By the time I got them, they were about half broke, and particularly Chico's was manageable, and he was, as far as I could see, the best of the 2 horses for me. Although Stacey liked the other one, Mono,
Yeah.
a lot too. Well, I liked them both, and I rode them both. But they were. I think what made them good was the breeding. Weren't they related to the horse Marion Roby rode?
Now, Donna Fitzgerald and Pat, they had some Hyannis Cattle Company horses. Yeah. The sire was Kosciuszko, a Wheatus too.
Yeah.
Son.
I thought Marion Roby's horse was Kosciuszko.
They were of Polish descent, and she rode a Polish, and I've forgotten the line.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure either, but I know these horses, I think, were out of Kosciuszko, weren't they?
Yes, they were.
And that's, so I think that had a lot to do with it.
It did.
Well, you had a horse, Garbage.
El Carbage.
El
Yes,
Carbage, yeah.
that's right. He was a Kosciuszko
Yeah,
son.
and how many rides did you make on him?
Let's see. I was 12 of 13.
Yeah, pretty darn good.
That's not bad.
Yeah, especially since you won how many?
Let's see, twice.
Twice, and best condition?
Twice.
Yeah.
At different times.
Pretty hot stuff, I'd say. Yeah. See, I never thought I could win a ride. I never had the ambition to win and that may sound like I'm making excuses after the fact, but truly that's the case. I wanted to go for the party. You remember when you asked me something about to me the ride was a party.
A party.
It was a family affair. It was a party. I had a lot of friends, and it was just a lot of fun. It was intense, it's concentrating, but it was just a hoot, and especially the memories. So the memories from one year would make me enthusiastic to go back the next year. So that's how come I kept going back. I wasn't trying to set a record and get a lot of buckles until I got to about 16 buckles, and I was done. But people said, hey, you got 16, you might as well get 20.
Going. Sure.
After that, it became a bit of a chore, especially since I wasn't able to find a horse that I really liked to ride. The last horse I rode, a Monte, was he was a nice horse, He scared some people. Carolyn wouldn't ride him. Stacy came off of him crying, but I got along with him okay. And he had a nice trot, but he was lazy. Gosh, he was lazy.
I know you tried another horse too, and we had some times where we rode the trail, either out and back or got dropped off and rode toward Auburn. Or there was a particular time, an incident with fording the river one afternoon, when we all thought, of course everyone may not know this, but the water gets regulated by a water agency further upstream. And in this case, we got there probably at the wrong time. Do you remember that?
I do. But before I tell you about that, you triggered one thought. I have owned over 100 horses that I've tried to
that many, really?
To see. Okay. And the ones that didn't work out, most of the time I was able to train them up well enough and pass them on to somebody that would enjoy them for whatever they would do.
Okay.
But so that was I just wanted to throw that in. It took a lot of horses to find a few good ones, and toward the end I didn't have very many good ones. And this horse that you're talking about was not a very good one, but I had hopes for him because he came out of Rascella, which was
Ralph and Betty Devers.
Ralph and Betty Devers stallion, who Page Harper rode and got best condition about 68 or 67.
I think that's right.
Somewhere in there.
68.
And I remembered that horse real well because I rode with him part of the way in 68 at Rascella. And so I thought this horse that I got from Ralph and Betty was, and I went to quite an effort to get that horse from them. It had pretty good conformation, but it just wasn't any good. He just didn't have any oomph. He didn't have the alacrity, the light-footedness that I expected. Well, anyway, so we're down. I'm still trying to work this horse and see what I got and see if I could make something of him. So I think I called you and I said, would you be up for a ride? I'd never been in water with him before. Be up for a ride from Forest Hill back to your house. And so as it turned out, Ann, your wife, drove us up to Forest Hill in your rig. I left my rig at your house. And so we were going to ride from Forest Hill to your house. What's that, maybe 30 miles?
Yeah, thereabouts.
And so we got down there at the river, and it was high. So you went, and I didn't think much of it. I've swum the river many times with horses, and a lot of times you just hang on to the saddle and float next to them if you need to, and go on across. Well, you went across ahead of me, and my horse dipped in, and as soon as the water got deep enough that he started to float a little bit, he started reaching for the bottom with his hind feet, tipping up like this, and the water was swift and it was deep. Because we didn't ask him to turn the water down that day.
Like they do for the ride,
yeah.
the night of the ride.
Well, and lots of times I'd crossed it when it was deep like that, but this time it didn't work very well. So I was afraid this horse, he was just about to go over backwards with me, and I didn't want him on top of me and get tangled up with. So I bailed. By that time, he had bounced along on his hind feet, and the water was carrying him down towards that big rock boulder weir there.
Yes.
And the water rushing through those rocks. And I bailed, and when I bailed, then he was able to get on across, and you were over there, and you caught him on the other side. Meantime, the water's taking me through I started to try to swim, and the water's so swift, I got to carry between those rocks, the weirs, and then into a bunch of other rocks below that. And I don't know how far down, it seemed like a long ways that I went, but I managed to get my feet in front of me.
That's right.
And get where the water was pushing me, and I was able to push against rocks and bounce my way across, but I was too far from the side where you were and my horse. I was on the wrong, I had to bounce over to the side where I started. So I hiked back up the bank, up the river, upstream, and where I could yell across the river at you, and it was enough thunder from that water that it was hard to hear each other. So I said to Hal, I said, Hal, what do I do now? He says, swim. So
go further up and where the water was a little lazy and you could swim across there.
So I put my gloves and my pack on the bank right there, brand new pair of deerskin gloves, and on the bank. And the next guy, I kept thinking, the next guy that comes along and sees that, he's going to say, well, I wonder who that guy was that said goodbye, cruel world. So anyway, I went upstream and then swam across, and I had to swim across pretty, and of course I had my boots on and jeans and shirt and everything. I lost my hat. I kept my hat, hoping I'd have the hat to wear it because it was such a sunny day and a hot day. But anyway, the hat went downstream.
Well, I thought about bringing the horses back across, but judging the way your horse went, the difficulty even that I had, whether you knew it or not, getting across, going up against the grain, so to speak, against that river flow, I thought maybe you swimming across.
Well, that was the right answer, but I mean, it was a tough swim. But fortunately I wasn't afraid of the water. But I was really worried that I would be able to swim fast enough to get across before I got drugged down. So, but I got across in the only decent place to cross. Yeah. But that was an experience. But I'm sure glad you didn't come back across, because Ann had gone back home.
Oh, that's right.
We would have gone to Forest Hill and had to call her, and I wasn't in any mood by that time to be waiting at Forest Hill.
She would not have been
She
happy.
might not have been home. No cell phones in those days.
That's right. That's right. Well, I don't know if it had anything to do with it or not, but that horse, you chose not to compete with him.
Correct.
And but you did wind up finishing for your 20th buckle.
Well, with the I can't remember what horses I had there, but I think my last three rides were on a Monte.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and I had taken him on a I think the year before, 89, I think I had taken him on a outlaw ride, of that 265-mile ride over in Utah area.
Yeah.
And when I got back, shortly after I got back, he developed a bowel obstruction, and so I lost a year with him because I had taken Davis, and they did a surgery, and it took about a year for him to recover.
Tell me, with the horses you had, the years of riding that you did, what were, say, your two toughest rides?
That's an easy one for me. There was one in between that started out tough, but was okay. But the two toughest ones were the first one, where that I told you about. There was a lot of travail on that one, and but the horse came through in good shape, and there should be a picture available for this video of the horse at the finish the next day, and she looks pretty good shape. Okay. Pretty good shape. That was a tough one. The last one was the toughest, or a very tough
Number
one.
20.
Number 20.
Okay.
Because I started on about Wednesday before the ride. I thought that horse was lame. I was worried it was lame, so I asked the vet. In that case, it happened to be Mitch Benson, who was the ride vet, and I asked him to come out and check it out for me, see if I should even try to go. And so he said, well, trot the horse down your driveway and back up, the usual thing. And so on the way back up, there was a rock. I had the brilliant idea that I would kick that rock out of the way. Well, when I kicked the rock out of the way, I tripped, and I tore the dickens out of my shoulder to the point where I couldn't squeeze my hand or hold anything with it, and it didn't feel very good either. So I was determined to do the ride. I had gotten this far, and so doing the ride with that one tucked into my shirt like that most of the way, it was.
You did it one-handed.
Pretty much one-handed, yeah. And there was a really delightful fellow named Bill Piper who came along. By the way, we started out toward the front of that controlled ride out of Roby Park up there. In fact, I think I was asked to lead the ride out or something. So we started out there, and I was having a hard time holding the horse with one hand. This was a horse, at the beginning, he wasn't lazy, but at the end, he was driving you nuts being lazy. When he wasn't really tired. So Bill Piper caught up with me somewhere after Elephant's Truck or somewhere along in there, and he said, I see you're having a little trouble there. So he says, I'll stay with you for a while. So if I had to get off the horse to go behind a tree or something, he'd hold my horse and,
good.
and maybe help me get back on. I couldn't manage to get on a rock. And
I'll bet that was hard.
It was.
Yeah.
And it was. It wasn't as much fun as it was cracked up to be, but it was great when it was over. It was even better after the surgeon fixed my shoulder.
Oh gosh. I have to ask you something that occasionally I'd experience if I were at a veterinarian examination checkpoint, and that had to do with when you would approach the checkpoint, there was this sound, call, if you will, that you made, that you told me later was something that you learned when you were at the University of Arkansas. It was called the Razorback, how did you describe it? The Razorback whoopee-suey call. Was that to alert your crew? What was that?
Well, that was to tell my horse that we were about to approach a settlement where there'd be something to eat.
Okay. And they knew that. Did you do that at your ranch? And
that was a call at the ranch,
and they'd show up.
Okay. And it was a call. We'd get separated at the ranch riding or over the ridge from one another, and you could get on top of the ridge and hoot, and usually somebody to hoot back. So
okay.
That
because people around me would ask, well, what is that? What does that mean? And I couldn't answer that.
And sometimes if there was one of our horses from the ranch, it was ahead of another horse, or ahead of the horse I was on, if I was coming to a rest stop, if I did that, the horse that's up already there would whinny, and they'd whinny back and forth, and that kind of encouraged them to get a little scoot behind them, get going.
See. Okay.
Yeah.
One of your children, I won't say which one, tells me that it might have been just to embarrass them.
Well, they always thought that. They thought some of the hats I wore were done to embarrass them too.
Okay. Do you have inclination to make that call again?
You think anybody's got ears for it? Put your plugs in.
Put your plugs in.
Pig!
That's it. That's what I remember. Excellent. Another, that I have to ask you was something you told me that, because we talked endurance riding wherever we were out training, or even the few occasions we might have ridden together during the event. Because it's a hot day, we're concerned about our horses, their electrolyte levels and hydration and whatnot. But I'd ask you, well, what did you partake in to keep your hydration level up? And you had something called a V-beer.
V-beer, yeah, it's a staple of a good endurance rider.
I didn't know that.
You don't reach your full potential unless you are used to V-beer, which is a 12-ounce can of V8. You know what V8?
Yeah, V8 juice.
V8,
Yeah, sure. Good.
and 2 cans of Coors
Okay.
beer, and you mix them together, and it's a very refreshing. And
I haven't seen that.
it's a delightful drink.
before.
It's full of electrolytes.
Yeah.
And it's quenches your thirst. And some people think that a little bit of spirits in there would help your endurance.
Yes. Your mental spirits, yes. That's good. The time that you started and to the time you finished, in those 20-some years, particularly in the early years, you would have ridden competitively, perhaps, or not competitively against some top riders. Ed Johnson, Bud Darty, Marion Roby. You mentioned already Carrie Ridgway as a friend and someone you brought along. Do you have any recollections specifically of any of those individuals?
Well, yeah,
or
but
others?
I take exception to your characterization of riding competitively against guys like Ed Johnson and Pat Fitzgerald.
Well, yeah.
I never intended to win. I always thought I took that motto from the very beginning seriously. To finish is to win.
Finished to win,
And,
yes.
and I never felt like it was much fun getting all that preparation going to ride and not finish. Finishing was the goal for me. So that probably accounts for why I have a good finish percentage. So I lost your question.
Well, I seem to recall there was a time that
Well,
you rode
okay,
with
you were
Marion.
asking about characters, and
Yes.
so I remember these people, and I tell you, watching Ed Johnson ride at Bezettel was an inspiration, and it made me want to go get Old Blue, or a horse like Old Blue.
Sure.
No kidding.
Yes.
And Pat Fitzgerald was a character too, and I had a few times to be involved with him, and some having to do with the ride itself, and some with some social rides with him. And I think you were along on one where he showed us where he had to hide out for one season while his ex-wife was looking for him to serve him with some papers or something.
That's right. That was the time we were exploring the Western States Trail east of Squaw Valley toward Carson City.
Yeah.
That's
yeah,
right.
Yeah.
He had a hideout.
Yeah, yeah.
That's true.
Yeah. There were a lot of other characters on the ride, among the ride. Do you remember Smokey Killen?
Smokey Killen being one.
There's a character. Now, back to those days, I think I first met him in '68. We were camped at the fairgrounds where we often camped for several days at a time with the family. Kids asleep on the grass in front of the stalls, and we'd have the horses there in the stalls. In the daytime, we'd go trailer out someplace and ride. And here comes Smokey Killen pulling a one-horse trailer in a brand-new Cadillac convertible. And when he opened the trunk, it was a full bar.
Jeez. Wow.
And, in those days, there was a lot of socializing going on. And so there was somebody always had a party the morning after the ride at their house, some Auburnite.
Yes.
And be Bloody Marys and cocktail and champagne.
Sure.
And everybody's invited. I don't know how many came. I never went more than one time to kind of see what the ambiance was. Drinking suits me, but not in the morning.
Yeah.
And so, but Smokey was he was such a character. He had this little horse called Jojo.
Joe, Appaloosa.
Yeah, little Appaloosa.
Yeah.
Jojo.
Jojo.
And he was just a nutcase, but I think he finished the ride.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And the skinny guy. Well, it turns out that I had a friend that knew Smokey during the World War II, and so the story about Smokey selling insurance to the soldiers was a whole nother thing. Well, Smokey was married to quite an elegant lady named Silver.
I remember Silver, yes.
And they had a big house down in Fair Oaks, I think, right?
Yeah.
On the river.
On the river, on the American.
And so they, I remember one time they had a big party down there in the afternoon on a Sunday. Everybody was invited. And it was quite the bash. Oh. Plenty of booze, and a lot of people showed up. Fancy cars.
Sure.
He introduced us to all these folks.
And before we move to the foundation and the organizational aspects and the history behind all that, I have one last question as it relates to your riding years. You spent 27 years riding mountain trails, high Sierras, kept coming back for not only the experience of that, but riding your horse, training it, whether it be in Santa Rosa or up there in the mountains. You saw a great deal of growth to the event itself, trail conditions, trail changes, management, horses might have changed. What stands out to you in those years?
Well, there's a lot in that question.
There is.
There really is. I mean, the ride changed so much. In the beginning, it was all about Wendell, and I mean, it was Wendell running the thing, and you could see he was trying to make an organization out of it. He had people that he would throw questions to at the board meetings, and they had rehearsed the answers, so the guys knew the right answers.
Sure.
And he had the whole organization there at the Hart Federal Savings to call on to support everything. And it was always a mystery to most of us outside the inner group, even if we were on the board, just what was going to be happening next as far as where's the trail going to go, what's going to be done about this, that, or the other thing. And it was just, they're having a board meeting. Wonder what they're going to come up with.
We're going to talk about this time.
Yeah, so it was, and it was more an Auburn thing. And Wendell kept trying to make it an international thing, and with a fair amount of success. And so he would always try to have at least one international rider show up for the ride and make a big point of it, publicize it. That was all good, and that's where the sickle killer came in, you know.
Well, let's talk about the sickle slayer. At least what your children seem to think.
Well, it has to do with trail changes too.
Trail change, that's true.
So there was a trail change necessary because of on the Red Star Ridge, due to the fact that we'd lost some trail up country.
Tahoe City to Squaw Valley.
Yeah, right.
The development that occurred in Tahoe City prohibited our ability to camp there and even ride the control ride for Squaw. So we had to make up some distance.
So anyway, Wendell had the idea that we would take this old trail that he knew about, or he thought he knew about, or he just made it up that he knew about, down Red Star Ridge instead of following the road down to Robinson once you got off the Red Star, the upper Red Star. And so followed the trail on down around through Duncan Canyon. and then back up the McGuire Trail to Robinson Flat. I think that's the McGuire Trail.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so Carolyn and Stacy and Sam and I were pre-riding in a 3-day deal. And my brother-in-law from Arkansas was driving a rig to meet us everywhere. So I think at some point Carolyn had gotten, before we even got started, she got altitude sickness or something, and because I know she started with us on that trip and I think finished with us, but she may not have been here on this particular section. We got at midday. We got from Squaw Valley to the road crossing at Red Star, and there we met Wendell and the Sickle Killer. And I call it the Sickle Killer because that's what the kids call it. It's the Sickle Killer. And at that particular summer, there was a guy who had been going around with a sickle, killing people in their tents. And so there was a big push to try to find the guy, and so they had drawings, police drawings, because nobody had a photograph of him, what this guy looked like. And so this fellow that was with Wendell was a spitting image of the drawings of the Sickle Killer, and he had a big sigh on his saddle. And they were going to go down this Red Star Ridge, which Wendell had bulldozed until the Forest Service stopped the bulldozer.
That's right.
And so, not to ever give up, Wendell said, "We're going. There's a trail there." So he said, "Come with us. We're going to explore this new trail because this is where the trail's going to go for the ride." Well, we wanted to go the way the ride was going to go. And so we said, "We got to meet somebody at Robinson." "Oh, you'll be there in plenty of time." Well, it was way after dark before we got there because we got to the end of where the bulldozing was, which is only about a mile, and then we were sucked into it. Oh, Wendell says, "Just a little further and then it'll open up." Well, we kept hacking our way through the brush down this, and it took hours until we finally got down to the McGuire Trail, to Duncan Creek and McGuire Trail. And so that's Wendell. You know, he'd get you on a ride. Happened to me many times, and you'd get stuck. But that was a change, and that was an experience.
Who really was the Sickle Slayer?
They finally found him, but it wasn't this guy. This was an Australian guy that Wendell had brought up to do an international rider. Yeah. And he was a nice guy. But to this day, the kids insist that
it was the Sickle Slayer. Funny who you might meet out on the trail. Yeah. You never know. Yeah.
So anyway, there's all those changes. So I went from a small group, a relatively small group. The first year I rode, there was 92, I think roughly 90-some people started. And I can remember one year when it was over 250.
Yes.
And the logistics of that, plus all the trail changes, plus all the, at first we got away with a lot of stuff, Wendell did especially, with the Forest Service because we were small and it wasn't such a big dent in their time schedule. But once it became a big deal, the Forest Service was all over it. And then negotiations with them, as we've talked about many times, is just, very difficult. And I personally, although I was involved in a lot of things, the Trail Committee and the Veterinary Committee and a lot of things having to do with trying to make the ride safer for horses, all those things evolved. And I was involved in quite a bit of that kind of stuff. But the transactions with the Forest Service were always, for me, very patience-trying, very taxing for patience.
Yeah, you would have experienced that. From 1969 to 1994, you served on the board, and 2 or 3 of those years, toward the end, you were the vice president of the foundation. At a time that really became somewhat pivotal, and I wonder if you might have some reflection on on this one particular moment that we had with the U.S. Forest Service. They informed us shortly after the
Were you talking about Granite Chief?
the Granite Chief Wilderness
Yeah,
area
yeah.
that was established as a part of the California Wilderness Act in 1984. Many people welcomed that whole notion, the piece of legislation that Congress passed and the president then signed. But what, unbeknownst to us, that there was a Forest Service and actually an interagency policy that didn't allow competitive events to be held through a wilderness area.
Yeah, at first we thought that's wonderful, protecting the area.
Good, great, terrific. And then we find out from the Forest Service
We're protected out.
we were being evicted.
Yeah.
And in essence, we had 2 years to find an alternate route. And you, I, and a few others spent a great many hours on foot and on horseback, scouting routes, looking for alternate starting sites. Tough deal, because those mountains just didn't allow many passages through. And this was one of which, while it wasn't the Overland Immigrant Trail, it was one that did exist, and travelers dating back to the mid-1800s were traveling over, whether it was coming from the east or going back over to the east, most of them being miners and whatnot. But that Wilderness Act and dealing with the Forest Service, really, we were pretty steadfast that we wanted to be able to continue using that trail. And I remember you and I went and visited the local congressman.
Well,
at the time.
Yeah.
And you brought up the notion of creating legislation that would exempt us.
Yeah, well, we had the idea, and I don't know who had the idea, but we publicized and wrote and got people to write editorials. We publicized the problem in all the horse magazines around the country. I mean, maybe 30 different horse magazines. And people would call and talk about it and want to get more detail, and then they'd write letters, and many of them urged their readers to send letters to the congressman. So when we went back there, the thing I remember, I know you remember a lot more detail about that than I.
Oh, when we went to Washington, D.C.?
Yeah, when we went back there, by the time we went back there, you talked about the legislation. We had to encourage them to write some legislation, and 26 congressmen had signed on to that.
That's true.
Bill, and a joint bill. And so as we visited them, they said, we got the message, our mail rooms are full, shut it off, shut the mail off.
That's right, because part of our grassroots effort was we had petitions that we encouraged our endurance riding community to sign and send, letters.
But horsemen from everywhere.
But everywhere.
Every horse sport, every equine sport would write about it.
They would.
Everybody felt like they'd been abused.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So all the while, we had the Western States Endurance Run organization, because they were impacted as well.
Sure.
Their event came through the wilderness area, not as long as we'd been traveling through it, but still, it was a pre-existing use. And they were doing their part, and both you and I and two representatives from their organization went to Washington, D.C., walked the halls, met with the California congregation.
Wasn't that fun?
That was, I was worn out walking all over the place. But and having both the two California United States senators who authored the California Wilderness Act saying, we didn't mean to preclude you.
Yeah.
So everyone.
That was Cranston. Who was the other senator?
Pete Wilson.
Yeah.
Pete Wilson and Alan Cranston both wrote letters to the chief of the Forest Service. Let them come through. It's not a big deal.
Yeah.
But the chief of the Forest Service, while we were trying to make appeals and going through the local, regional, and national levels, every time we were denied.
Yeah.
And given the that we went back there and met not only with congressmen in the hallways or wherever it might have been in their offices, the legislative aides of the subcommittee of Congress that was going to hear the legislation, convincing them, I thought was a big turning point. And while we were there and having all that in our hip pocket, we decided to call the chief of the Forest Service and just say, look, we're here. We've got a couple hours before our planes take off. Would you want to meet and we'd update you on how we're doing? And he invited us down to his office. We met with the chief, listened to us, suggested that he have at least 2 weeks to think about it and that he would contact us. And I don't know if you knew this or not, but the chief traveled with his wife, came out from Washington, didn't tell anybody, walked through the Granite Chief Wilderness area alone, saw the landscape, went back to Washington and said, you know what, you're in, and gave some concessions to us. Because we asked, not only do we continue use, but we need a new home, an actual permanent starting site.
Yeah.
And you were very helpful with that, as well as would they consider designation of all or part of the trail in some historical aspect. And I wasn't sure what all that might have meant then, but I do now. And so we were able to have a portion of the trail listed on the National Register of Historic Places from Michigan Bluff to Last Chance. Your contact through, I think it was Red Emerson at Sierra Pacific, we were able to strike a deal and acquire 160 acres east of Squaw Valley, which is still the home of the start of the Tevis Ride.
Yeah, yeah.
How do you feel about all that?
Well, I was pretty satisfied with it at the time. Pretty proud of it, but hopefully it still works, and it'll work for a long time. But
yeah,
are the rides still going to continue starting from that location?
I believe so.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, that's a good start. That's a good place to start, except for the access getting in the night before. Sometimes
yeah, a little travel time
yeah.
and getting in. Yeah, no, I call it a pivotal point in not just the ride but the foundation, because we focus so much of our attention running and organizing that ride then and even now that it would have curtailed that possibility.
Well, if we hadn't been able to secure that, I think the ride would have gone kaput. I think it would have been the end of it.
Yeah.
There would have been other rides, no doubt, but they never would have been the same. They wouldn't have the legacy or the history behind them that the ride has at this point.
That's true. Backtrack a little bit.
Yeah.
Wendell, you joined the foundation in 1969. How was it that you got asked to participate on the board?
Well, I still have a vision in my mind, a mental picture of being at the fairgrounds in one of those stalls the morning after the ride. I slept next to my horse. Old Blue's lying on his back, breathing deep, sound asleep. I'm sleeping there next to him with a few empty beer cans. And here comes Wendell and Will Tevis. And they're looking at the top 10 horses. And so they're looking at, and they woke me up and they said, well, what did you think about the ride? And so I said, well, I enjoyed the ride a lot. But well, do you think you'll come back? Or something, I led to that. And I said, well, I'm not sure about that. Why wouldn't you do that? Well, I said, I see some problems with the ride. I see the potential for some horses to not do well. In other words, for horses to get hurt. Why is that? Well, there's just not enough checkpoints, not enough rest stops. So I see some people overriding their horses. And they said, that really bothers you, huh? Yeah, it sure does. Well, why don't you join the board and help us fix that? So, the way to disarm your enemy is to get him to be on your side. Well, I wasn't their enemy, but,
Yes.
But anyway.
That's good.
And that's how I happened to get on the trail committee, the vet committee.
The vet committee,
and those things, because we began then to right away when we began setting up additional checkpoints, 10-minute holds to a pulse, or additional maybe a half-hour stop here or there, especially Devil's Thumb or Deadwood and places like that, where before going into canyons or after coming out of a canyon, places where horses have been under a great deal of stress.
I think you also were instrumental in hiring Mitch Benson as the head veterinarian.
Yeah, but you were involved in that too.
Yeah.
I think I did recommend him because I knew about him, because I'd seen him on some other rides.
Because he brought a whole different perspective.
Perspective and a way of managing things. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was good.
Yeah. And he had a good. He was a horseman himself, and he had a good field for horses. I'll give you an example. I think it was probably my last ride, and I told you about my lazy horse. Well, so we're at Forest Hill, and two vets have looked at my horse, including probably Hank Cook, who suggested maybe you wouldn't want to go on. Your horse seems like he's a little tired. And just as I was about to give up the ghost on that one, Mitch Benson drove up, and I saw that tall hat coming out of and he looked over and saw me, and saw the 2 or 3 vets standing around there. And he walked right over, and they said, "Well, here's the deal." And he said, "Well, let me look." So then he looked around, and he said, "Oh," he said, "there's nothing wrong with this horse. He's just lazy." And it says, "And McCullough's been riding horses since before I was born." He says, "He'll take care of him."
That's good.
I could go on. But that wasn't right after we'd hired Mitch. That was
Before.
way later.
Oh, later. I
Yeah,
see.
I mean, it wasn't that first year.
No.
No. That was my last ride.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I knew how much time you spent coming up into the Sierra Nevadas and riding, preparing, your commitment to the organization when you joined the board, the effort that you put into it. Now, Chuck Stolley would tell you, the ride director of the Tevis Ride now, that a lot of people don't realize how much of an effort goes into having an annual event like the Tevis Ride. And I recall a time when the winter of 82, 83, storms dropped a ton of snow up on the Sierra Crest. It was a cool spring and early summer. The thaw just didn't happen. And one of those things that behind the scenes of how we're committed to organize the event and have it held on an annual basis went, I thought, a little bit beyond the call of duty. I think you had negotiated a hiring of a helicopter so that we can travel over. You remember that?
Oh, yeah. I was sitting in my office one day, and I was thinking, how the heck are we going to figure out whether there's too much snow? Got the idea of calling up to Tahoe City or someplace, one of these airport facilities, and so we arranged to have a helicopter ride. And I think it was the pilot, you, and Jim Larimer, me. So we met there in the parking lot at Squaw Valley, right right under the, what's that?
The tram?
Right under the tram, right?
Yeah.
Right at the tram. And it didn't take this guy about 2 minutes to instruct us to stay away from the back of the helicopter. Didn't want to get chopped up, and get in, and who's gonna be the direct me. And so I got elected. So I was had the earphones on, so I could talk directly to the pilot.
Oh, that's right.
So so I had to give him instructions, and you guys were pointing things out to me so I could talk to him.
Yeah.
But we got off the ground. I got up about, maybe 300 yards or 1,000 feet or so, and then all of a sudden we just came whoosh right back down like we were going to slam against the ground. And just before we slammed against the ground, he sideslipped and over there. And so then he moved around a little bit and tried again. Same sort of thing happened. Mm-hmm. And so I said something about the cross currents, and he said, yeah. Yeah. So then he made another maneuver and skated around, and we finally got up. Mm-hmm. And so we started out with being a little puckered.
Is that what you call that?
and so then we flew on the trail over to Robinson Flat eventually. I mean, but we flew the upper trail and the lower trail and back and forth trying to find out if there was any place where there wasn't too much snow.
Snow, yes.
And as far as I was concerned, there wasn't any way that we were going to get through there. When we got to Robinson, the snow was shallow enough that we could probably get into there. All right, it looked like things were fairly light on the road coming in. So that meant that we could possibly start at Soda Springs and just essentially ride the road to the Elephant's to Lion Ridge,
yep.
And the Elephant's Trunk, and
down to French Meadows.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep. And
in your knowledge of knowing where the McGuire Trail was,
did we go to French Meadows that year?
Yeah, we did. The first vet examination was held at the boat launching ramp at the east side of French Meadows Reservoir.
Okay.
Pretty good spot. And then we rode the trail along the North Shore that you'd been on before and knew about, and that made the connection to Duncan Canyon and the McGuire Trail.
All right, that's how we did it. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, yes, what the efforts that go into it.
Yeah. Well, it's much tougher now than it was then. I mean, at those times, I think you told me later about correspondence you found having to do with where we parked the night before the ride at Soda Springs. Apparently,
apparently Jim Larimer, the president, had not asked permission to do that. And unbeknownst to all of us, that was the case. And then 2 weeks later, we received a letter saying, you came, you went, you're not coming again. So when a few years back, when the ride had to start from Soda Springs again, similar situation, too much snow, Tony Benedetti called me and said, "Now you were the president back in those days, or vice president. How did that all unfold?" And I told him, I said, "If you're thinking of starting at Serene Lakes, you will be arrested, because they've already let it be known that that's not going to happen again." And because hundreds of people showed up, because we told everyone to stay, most everybody, spend the night in wherever you want to, but we have a spot in Squaw Valley.
Yeah.
And most folks did, and that meant they loaded up early. They came in, they drove into that subdivision around Serene Lakes, just mountain cabins, property owners and whatnot, and we parked in driveways and front yards and unloaded, and off we went. So they were upset, to say the least. I'm impressed they didn't have us arrested even then.
Joe rode for the first time. That's a little story.
Well, didn't he have a nickname for you?
One more loop.
One more loop, McCullough.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, Carolyn and Joe and Martha and company, they gave me a loving cup when I got my 1,000-mile buckle. Says 1,000 miles is just one more loop 1,000 times.
You better tell them that.
Bob, did you get that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right. Well, that was a zinger you're looking for. I have a closing. We've talked about. I want to get to reflection, but the only other couple questions I had for you here that I haven't asked is what you thought of Wendell and what he established. You know, he was one of the founders, longtime president. His legacy. What do you think about all that when you think of what Wendell started here?
Well, Wendell was just such an unusual guy. I've met a lot of characters in my travels around the world and in business and other places, but he's just so memorable, so unique that it's hard to find words. It's just fiercely independent, straight arrow.
Driving force, maybe?
And he just forceful, just a force of personality that just has to have his way. And yet, what I found was so often he seemed to be obstinate and a bit unruly when people would make suggestions that he didn't condone. So he was the guy who had the idea of starting the ride in flights.
The group starts, yes. You called them flights.
Yeah, well, that was a timekeeping nightmare because you could be riding along with somebody toward the finish if you were hoping to be in top 10, and you wouldn't know what flight they started in. They could be behind you or they could be ahead of you, but you could be with them at the finish, and you would never know.
What was the origins to the flights, the group starts?
Wendell used to race dog sleds in the wintertime. He was a skier, and he had the dog sleds, and so in the dog races, because of the equipment and so forth, they have to start out to keep from getting tangled up with all the rig and the gears and so forth. So they start them in flights. But horse racing, what we found was if you go to other rides, they'd have a shotgun start. And I've been to rides where they actually shoot a gun. And some horses do startle. But for the most part, it's just somebody waves a flag and
off you go.
Off you go.
Yeah.
And that's still called a shotgun start in my lingo. But anyway, sometime in the 70s, I wrote Wendell a letter and explained that I'd been on a lot of rides and I sure enjoyed the way we'd been doing it. But for the numbers of people that we had nowadays and the issues we had with timing and the extra work it was and the confusion. And I didn't go into much detail about the problems. He, I think, was aware of the problems, but I suggested that we do it. It was a nice letter, but to the point that let's try a shotgun start. I think it'll work. Those people will sort themselves out.
When did they start the shotgun starts?
Well, I don't remember, but it was somewhere in the early 80s, I believe.
I think 1980, my guess would be 1983 because that's the snow year, and we started at Serene Lakes, and there was just no organization there that had been planned and to start, and I think we all just pulled out. And then Wendell passed away in '84, My guess is that it was about that time.
Well, I think, I thought maybe it was a little before that then, because I think it was Wendell who accepted my recollection is Wendell accepted the suggestion and made a little discussion about it at the board meeting. And so, but I might be wrong.
Yeah. No, that's...
I don't have a totally clear recollection.
And I'm sure that there's a record of that either, but it
doesn't really make much difference. I do recall this. He accepted the recommendation and did so appreciatively. So, I think he genuinely maybe was looking for a way out of that, and somebody approached him with a way to do it.
A way to do it, and we did it. Yeah.
A good excuse. I think people were maybe afraid to suggest it to him.
Yes, because he was resistant it for a long time.
Yeah.
And there was more and more correspondence coming in suggesting that it
So maybe he sent letters to other people that said it was a good idea now.
more than you, yes. Okay. Well, with what he established, and it's 64 years now and running, sky's the limit. Do you see now? I remember.
Let me just back up just a bit, because I didn't quite finish that. Here's a guy who, when he runs into trouble with the Forest Service, calls Richard Nixon.
That's right.
Or when he rides horses with Ronald Reagan, or he knows how to make these contacts. And here's just a guy who drives an old pickup truck that's called the Blue Goose, and it's hand painted with orange house paint.
It was orange. That's right.
And that's his primary horse transportation.
That's true. Yeah.
And yet he's a mixer. But he is consistent about being fiercely independent.
Yes.
If he wanted to drive a Blue Goose, he'd drive a Blue Goose.
Whether it was orange or pink polka dots or whatever. But
you remember the Blue Goose?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I rode in it many times. Crazy. I wanted to bail out, but that's another story.
He was notorious for being really...
I think it's written in his book, in the book that they wrote about him. So he's had books written about him. He was a civic leader, like him or not. He was in the financial business with a bank, president and chairman and whatnot, and then starts skiing in Northern California. He's one of the founders of that, and he's a founder of the Tevis Cup Ride. Incredible. He used to write in his publications that he thought that he said the Tevis Ride was an advanced degree in horsemanship at an Olympic level.
I always believed that.
Do you believe that?
Well, he said so.
He said so, and we believed a lot of what he used to say, but having been a competitor myself in the event, I always thought it was an Olympic style at that level.
Well, the fact that he said it made it possible for me to tell other people that I ride at an Olympic level horse event.
Do you believe something like this event, and as long as it's lasted, and it's gone through its trials and tribulations and pivotal times, do you see that it is of such merit that it warrants, say, a memorialized, not a structure, not a statue, but like a museum? You've been in your travels. What do you think? How does it compare?
Well, I think it deserves that for people to understand what it is. Most people don't know what endurance riding is. Even today, after all these years, most often people never heard of cross-country horse racing, and so it's And so I think it's a little hard to understand, but for those who appreciate it, for equestrians, sure.
It's right
There's a Hall of Fame for baseball, there's for nearly every sport, and there probably should be something that makes sure this happens. As the country gets more populous and there's more restrictions, it's mostly restrictions because there's still lots of open land. The problem of being able to put on this kind of an event it would be almost impossible to start one right now. The closest thing that comes to that I know of, and I don't know how it's getting along now, but that outlaw ride that the people over there in Utah used to put on.
The Outlaw Trail, yeah.
Yeah.
It's no longer. They can't hold it any longer.
Well, see, there you go.
Another wilderness area.
Yeah.
I think put the
Yeah.
kibosh on
Yeah.
that.
I was afraid of that. Butchinetta.
That's right, Butchinetta.
Butchinetta.
Well, I want to close, if it's now's the
Sure.
time,
All right.
and read this to you. You know, after your retirement, several years later, Time magazine came out and published their version of the top 10 endurance competitions in the world. And guess who was on the list? Tevis Cup Ride.
Tevis, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
In amongst, and I won't read all of them, the Tour de France, the 2,174-mile bike race that lasts over 20 days is one. 24 hours at Le Mans, it's a car race. The Iditarod trail sled dog race of 1,150 miles. It takes anywhere from 10 to 17 days. What's another one? 4 deserts, 6 days, 150 miles walk across the Gobi, Sahara, and I can't pronounce the other desert in Chile. You know, it just goes on with
These are 10?
10, and the Tevis Ride is among them. What they wrote was, the article read, a 24-hour, 100-mile horse ride from Lake Tahoe to Auburn, California. The Tevis Cup was first held in 1955. The important thing to know about this race is found on the Tevis website. Quote, the weather conditions from year to year are mostly the same, hot and dusty. One of the major difficulties here is not just getting your horse to the finish line, but making sure your horse is still fit to continue when it reaches the finish line. If you do so, no matter what place you come in, you get a silver buckle. That's right, 100 miles in 24 hours for a belt buckle. So when I first read that, I knew that it was a tough endeavor. I still get, from every ride that I went to, if I dared to ride to the start, I'd have butterflies in my stomach. People refer to that as that, because I knew what a daunting task it was for both the horse and the rider. So I wondered what your impressions were, you know, after this publication and all of that has taken place over the time. What your thoughts are?
Well, I didn't know about this publication, or if I did, I'd have gotten lost in my in my trove of lost memories. But but it is it's everything you said. It's a daunting task. It's the sort of thing you look back on and you say, boy, I did that? Yeah, and I'm glad I did that. There's 1,000 places you can make a mistake on that ride. Not just taking the wrong turn, pushing your horse at the wrong time, trying to pass in the wrong place, getting too close behind a kicking horse, a horse that will kick, getting your stirrups tangled on a narrow trail.
All those things, yes.
Yeah, people that won't let you pass. You call for trail, and they don't move.
That's right.
So you get frustrated, you can do something goofy.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Well, I think I speak for everybody here and for the Western States Trail Foundation Board of Governors. We thank you for your time. Glad this happened. You've been on my list for a long time.
Which, careful now.
But I'm glad it happened, and we're grateful for your presence.
Well, I'm pleased to have the opportunity to talk about some things that I'd long forgotten. I wouldn't trade the time I spent with my kids and with the horses and with the Tevis and with all the friends I made on the Tevis and all the adventures. I wouldn't trade that for anything I can think of. I don't know of anything I would rather have done with my time. It was challenging and exciting, satisfying, and probably a lot healthier than sitting in front of a TV by a long shot. Much more fun than golf, a lot more lasting than tennis.
Sure.
But it wasn't just entertainment. There's an intellectual side to it.
Mm-hmm.
It's mentally challenging. You have to learn about the horses. You have to pay attention. If you don't pay attention, you pay.
You told me once that shortly after your first finish, you went back to where your professional life was at Optical Coating Laboratory, and you told everybody, well, I don't know everybody, but a number of people, that you'd finished. What was the response?
We had a senior group of officers and senior staff that would meet 3 days a week for lunch in the conference room, catered lunch, so that we could exchange information, kind of an informal get-together, and people would sometimes talk about things other than business, but usually we stuck to business pretty much. But I came in with pretty excited with the buckle in the box, and they kind of wondered where I'd been. You know, I'd spent a lot of time away from the office that summer, and so I showed that around and explained what I did. Nobody had any more idea about it than a dog does about, or a hog does about Sunday, and so they just kind of passed it around, looked at it, and nobody commented much. And I had been thinking of quitting business for a while anyway. I was able to do that, and that just kind of cinched it down for me. And 2 months later, I was out of there. So.
Were you really?
Yeah, and I stayed away from the business from that was late '67, and I stayed away from the business until late '72. I think they started running into some difficulties. and yes, I remember spending Christmas of '72 trying to sort things out for them.
But they wanted you back.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And were there conditions?
Oh yeah.
Okay. And one of them, no doubt, had to do with getting away from the summer and going up in the mountains and ride.
Yeah. First of all, by then I had other things playing, had the ranch going, had some other business things where I could manage my own time. But work was second priority to me at that point. And so I had a fondness for the business, for the company, for the people. The fact that they didn't appreciate my buckle was not a knock on them. It wasn't a lick on them. It was just that they didn't understand.
Had the education.
I couldn't blame them for not understanding. So
that's right.
So yeah, it was very limited time, and it went that way for the next 28 years.
Okay. Yeah, it would have been.
Yeah.
You have your daughter, Stacey, is now on the Board of Governors of the Western States Trail Foundation.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Oh, I'm proud. I'm glad. I think she's terrific. And I think she helps Chuck some too, doesn't she?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
She does.
And she enjoys it. And she's a far better rider than she gives herself credit for. She's, as you know, she has 10 buckles.
10 buckles, yeah.
But she many times could have gone off and left me, and I could never persuade her to do that.
Is that right?
Whenever we rode together.
Very good. Yeah. She was a big help to me in preparing, believe it or not.
Oh, really good.
Yeah,
Good.
I consulted with her, and she talked to her sister Carolyn, and they, yeah.
Yeah.
And we're sorry that she couldn't make it here today.
Yeah.
The weather precluded that from happening, but thank you, Stacey.
By the way, I wanted to, you just reminded me of something. And that is, you know, we got burned out at the ranch in the Tubbs fire in October of 2017. Totally burned out. Both barns, the house, every bit of the infrastructure. Lost some cattle. And all my belt buckles.
I was going to ask you about that.
And everything. And the board got together and got me this new 2,000-mile buckle.
I was going to ask. That's
and
great.
And a beautiful card with signatures on it from apparently everybody. It's got a lot of signatures, and people that don't even know me, or that I don't, but just I am so moved by that it's just that's something I'll always remember.
That's a good touch. Yeah, very nice.
Yeah. So thank you, board. You helped me recollect. I treasure my memories of these rides and always will. So thank you very much.